Okay, hello, welcome everyone. Thanks for hanging out on a Thursday at 9 o'clock. We will be talking about OpAMP and today. And before we do that, we will introduce ourselves. My name is Adriana Villela, and I am from Toronto, Canada, originally from Brazil. I am a CNCF ambassador, blogger, podcaster, and I'm also one of the maintainers of the OpenTelemetry end user SIG. By day, I am a principal developer advocate at Dynatrace, and by night, I like to climb walls. I checked out a couple of the local bouldering gyms here in London. It's my 4th time in London, so I'm super excited to be here. I also love capybaras because they make me very happy.
So hi everyone, I'm Aakansha and I'm based out of India. So I'm also a CNCF ambassador and I'm currently working as a solution architect at -0. So working closely with OpenTelemetry and observability. And outside of work, I love traveling. So this is my 3rd time in London and it's always a great experience. And as a fun fact, this is actually our first time together as like giving a talk together.
Yay.
And I'm like really excited to be here and looking forward to this session.
Yes, yeah, I'm super excited too. We've known each other for a few years now, so first time collaborating. So first things first, who here has heard of OpAMP? All right, cool. Now, for our one audience member who has heard of OpAMP, yay. For everyone else, like to be honest, like when we're putting this talk together, OpAMP has been on my personal bucket list for OpenTelemetry for a while. It's been around since 2022. And it's one of those things that the documentation is super confusing. To say the least. There's like literally 2 blog posts about OpAMP, soon to be a 3rd because we're going to write a blog post about this. Yeah, so it was a bit of a journey. It involved a lot of sleuthing, asking ChatGPT about stuff, and then asking the OpenTelemetry maintainers of OpAMP to help us unravel the mysteries of OpAMP so we can unravel it for you. And with that, let's begin.
Yeah, so before we get started, like a couple of quick questions, like who is familiar with observability here?
Yay.
Okay, a lot of people, good to know. And who here has worked with OpenTelemetry?
Yay,
Oh, okay. Nice.
Amazing.
Nice. So even if you're not familiar with either of those, that's totally fine. We will walk you through the concept. So at the end of this talk, you will be quite comfortable with those things as well.
And you know, this is not an intro to OpenTelemetry, but we are going to just go over some basic OpenTelemetry concepts for the purposes of level setting. I assure you the bulk of this talk will be on OpAMP. And with that, you know, I love to start with a definition of observability because there are a bunch of them out there. This is my favorite definition of observability from my good friend Hazel Weekly. It is the ability to ask meaningful questions, get useful answers, and act effectively on what you've learned. Now, we can't do that if we don't have any data to be able to ask those questions and get those answers, and this is where OpenTelemetry comes in.
So what is OpenTelemetry, right? And at a high level, OpenTelemetry is like a CNCF project, right? CNCF stands for the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. And this project helps you understand like what is happening inside your systems, right? It is open source, it is vendor neutral, so which is really important that you are not logged into a single observability tool or vendor. And what Otel focuses on is the collection of your telemetry signals, which is your traces, logs, and metrics, by providing you a standardized way of instrumenting your workloads, and you can export that data wherever you want. Now, about the Otel signals, right? So first one being, so telemetry is like OpenTelemetry is made up of signals, right? And when we say signals, we really just mean the data that your system is emitting. And it helps you understand like what's going on. In practice, Otel, like again, as I mentioned before, it focuses on the 3 main signals, which is the metrics, traces, and logs. And we will look at each of those in the next slides. So first is the distributed traces, and so if I talk about a very simple example, so traces shows you the full journey of your request. So for example, let's take a very real world example that you're going to a shopping cart, you went to a store, and then you chose some item that you liked and you bought it, right? So there are so many steps involved. So right from the first step of going to a store, choosing your item and getting that checked out is a whole path, and this is what Traces gives you that information. Now comes the logs. So these are the detailed messages that your application writes, like your errors, warnings, or this is something that just happened. So they are great when you're trying to need some context and specifics along with the timestamp. And then finally, we have metrics. So metrics are numbers over time. So things like your CPU usage, your latency, your request rates. So it basically helps you understand the trends and helps you find any problems quickly. So we have talked about signals like traces, metrics, logs again, right? And how OpenTelemetry works with this, like how it comes into picture. Now that we know what is the what, now let's try to understand the how. And Adriana, over to you to talk about the OpenTelemetry components.
Yeah, so under the hood, very briefly, OpenTelemetry is made up of the following. So there's the specification, which is, it describes OpenTelemetry, and that includes semantic conventions. So semantic conventions, you can think of them as like standardized labels, just like you have, when you're buying stuff at the grocery store and you've got your food nutrition labels where you've got your information on your carbohydrates and your fats and your sugars. Semantic conventions are like that for OpenTelemetry. Then we have the API and SDK. Now the API is the entry point in your telemetry and it describes how it's supposed to work. And then we have the SDK, which is the implementation of the API, and it really is the it's basically if the API is the what, the SDK is the how. And then we have OTLP, which is the OpenTelemetry protocol, which is basically how is it that we are transporting our telemetry data. That is thanks to OTLP. And then finally, we have the OpenTelemetry Collector, which is my favorite part of OpenTelemetry. It is an optional component of OpenTelemetry, and it's known as the Swiss Army knife of OpenTelemetry because it allows you to ingest data from multiple sources. It processes your data so you can do transformations of all kinds, and then it sends your data to one or more destinations. And the collector will factor in to our OpAMP discussion. So we're going to take a little bit of time to just talk very high level about the collector.
So now that you have seen the different OpenTelemetry components, and there's one component that binds everything together in OpenTelemetry, which is the OpenTelemetry Collector, and that's also Adriana's favorite component, right? So Adriana, you want to walk through what OpenTelemetry Collector is and why it's so important?
Yeah, so we understand it from a high level, but you might be wondering, okay, it's an optional component, why do we use it? Because if you're instrumenting your application with OpenTelemetry, you might notice that you can actually send your telemetry directly from your application instrumentation to your telemetry backend, which is awesome. And the collector, though, it also allows you to do that. And the thing that I like about the collector is that it allows you to ingest data from multiple sources. It decouples the source of the telemetry from the destination. I think the magic of the collector is that you're not just ingesting data from your application, you're ingesting it from your infrastructure as well, and your infrastructure can emit data in different formats that other than OTLP. Your application instrumentation with OpenTelemetry will typically emit it in OTLP, but for example, your infrastructure metrics might take on the form like the Prometheus format. So the collector can take on different data formats. Everyone is welcome kind of thing. And then on top of that, the collector gives us a little bit extra resilience and scalability. For example, it allows you to batch your data. So you're not bombarding your backend with constant stream of data, right? So you can chunk your data, send it off. On top of that, you can do stuff like sample your data. Again, you're not bombarding your backend with data. And then you can do things like load balancing. You can set up retries so that there's a network connection issue between your collector and your backend. Great, you can set up a certain number of retry attempts so that you're less likely to lose your data in transit, which is super important. Now, with that in mind, Aakansha is just going to, at a very high level, describe the Otel Collector components because that will come into play for our discussion on OpAMP.
So the Otel Collector is made up of the following components, and the first one is the receiver. So this is where your Otel Collector will start listening for your telemetry data from your apps or systems. And just for a very quick example, that it could be a OTLP receiver, there could be a host metric receivers. So there are different receivers, and you can of course look it up on the open source project, right? So you will find a lot of receivers for its different purpose. Then we have the processors. So you use processors to transform or filter your data before it's sent anywhere, right? And then we have the connectors. So basically it helps you connect different data pipelines. So for an example, you have a trace, and then you have like a start point, and then you have an end point, right? So you use that metric to, like, you use that number to convert it to a metric. So it helps you in that conversion. And then we have the extensions. It is again an optional component, but it helps you add capabilities to your Otel Collector. And then we have the exporters, because you had a listener, so you need something to emit, right? So this is where the exporters comes into place, and it sends the telemetry to a backend for your storage or analysis.
And Aakansha, where do you deploy your collectors to?
Yeah, so there are a couple of ways. So of course, a lot of people here are developers, so you can use Docker or Docker Compose locally to do it, right? And then in prod, you can use Kubernetes or another workload orchestrator. And another option could be in prod is like using a standalone binary on bare metal on Linux, Windows, or Mac OS. So we love the OpenTelemetry Collector. Like, it's flexible, it's open source, and making collecting metrics, logs, and traces like very easy. But observability at scale is hard, right? As more teams adopt it, more services are added, right? The number of collectors grows quickly, and you have to manage that fleet of agents is in thousands and hundreds, which is like really difficult. Like, you have so many instances. So managing all these collectors becomes a challenge, and your configuration needs to be consistent. Your updates needs to be rolled out safely, and your overall system health should be reliable, right? And without a careful management, scaling can quickly introduce risks and make it more error prone. Now, we talked about, like, of course, how it's difficult to scale. Like, there are so many issues. So why not talk about the scaling pain points? And the first one is the configuration drifts. Because there will be so many collectors, there is a possibility of slightly different settings, and which can make your telemetry inconsistent. So that is the number one thing. There could be a brittle rollout process. So deploying updates to hundreds of collectors is risky, and it makes it again prone to failure if not managed carefully. Third is the network failure. So while you're trying to update your configurations of your collector, there could be a network failure, and then of course there's loss of data and loss of the whole process, right? The next, there are more challenges. So one is again inconsistent policies that can emerge across teams and making it difficult to make it consistent across all the collectors. Then if you're doing manual upgrades to collectors is again like difficult, because if there is one mistake, you are disrupting your data, and your data collection process can be error prone. And finally, there is faulty agents. So whenever collector fails or behaves unexpectedly, it adds instability to your system, especially at scale. So these are a couple of problems that we see around, and of course, there needs to be a solution. Like, if this has been the scale, there needs to be a point like which makes our lives easier, right? And
but you might be wondering, like, okay, but can't like we take care of this with like some nicely placed CI/CD pipelines, some lovely GitOps solutions?
But see, the CI/CD is great for like deploying updates, but when you have hundreds and thousands of collectors, like, it's not enough. CI/CD pipelines can be slow and hard to scale across multiple environments, and you don't automatically, like, it does not automatically handle your runtime issues or your configuration inconsistency. And this is where like CI/CD is not a helpful solution.
Now, that's not to say that you can't use CI/CD with OpAMP. I think the combination of the two, I think, gives it like extra superpowers. And that's really what we're going to talk about, right?
So what do we do? Like, we talked about so many problems, right? And I'm
Spoiler
sure
alert.
everyone needs to have a solution. So
Yes, and oh my goodness, is it OpAMP? Who would have thought? Because that's why we're here. So OpAMP, what does it stand for? It stands for Open Agent Management Protocol. And I want to point I want you to note, no, great, my little pointer thingy's not working, but I want you to note that it's not OpenTelemetry Agent Management Protocol, it's Open Agent Management Protocol, and that's done very much on purpose. So even though this was created as part of the OpenTelemetry project, it was created very intentionally with the idea of like, anything that is a data collection agent can be managed by OpAMP. So by data collection agent, I mean anything that ingests data from somewhere, transforms it, and sends it somewhere else. And really, it's all about, it's a protocol about how clients and servers talk to each other. And with that, you might imagine that then the core components of OpAMP are an OpAMP server and an OpAMP client. So Aakansha, tell us about the OpAMP server and client.
yeah, so you can imagine the OpAMP server as like a control plane, which is managing one or more OpAMP clients. And what's its primary goal is that it needs to send your configuration updates, your packages, and instructions to the client. And it implements the OpAMP server to agent protobuf specs. So there are a couple of server implementations, and the very first one is a Go OpAMP server. There is Python OpAMP server, there's Elixir OpAMP server, right? But the Otel one is not recommended to use in production.
Actually, these are all like, so the Otel one is the official Otel one, which is an example implementation of saying like, hey, we've got the protobuf spec. This is what it would look like if we were to implement a simple, create a simple implementation in Go. The Python and Elixir implementations are community ones. So none of these are, I would say, production ready, but these give you an idea of like what you can do, right? You're implementing that spec and you can create your own server. But it is interesting. I definitely recommend that you check these out just because it's kind of cool to see. Like these are server implementations written in 3 different languages, which is very cool.
And of course, you can write your own server implementations as well. So that's definitely a flexibility. And this is a very bare bone picture of how your Go OpAMP server will look like when you are running it on local host. So this is the agents, and you have the instance IDs of the agents, right? Then we talk about the OpAMP client. So this is the thing which is being managed by your server. It registers with the server, so the server knows about it, that who is my client, right? And the client capabilities are like, it will report the status, it will receive remote configurations from the server, it will apply the updates, and the only mandatory capability implemented by the OpAMP client is report status. Rest of the other capabilities is optional. So just as with the OpAMP servers, you can also write your own OpAMP client implementations as well.
Now, you might be wondering, okay, cool. So how does the Otel Collector fit into all this? Because as we learned, it is an open agent management protocol. Collector is one of the things that can be managed by OpAMP. What does that actually look like in practice? So there are a few things that exist in OpenTelemetry that facilitate this. And one is the OpAMP extension. So the OpAMP extension, remember how Aakansha said that the one thing that must be implemented in the in the client side is the report status. Well, the OpAMP extension does that. So it's an Otel Collector component. And as we learned from Aakansha telling us earlier about extensions, they give us additional capabilities on our Otel Collector. So it sends info about our collector to the OpAMP server, so that report status. Now, because it's just sending info, it is read-only. So at the end of the day, that's great, but you might be wondering, yeah, but if this thing is meant to allow us to basically apply bulk configurations to manage our collectors, well, this is kind of useless, right? You might be thinking that. I was thinking that too. Well, that's why we have this other component, which I'll talk about in a sec. But this diagram here just gives us an idea of like what what the OpAMP extension gives us. Now, important thing to note, by adding the OpAMP extension to the collector, it effectively turns the collector into an OpAMP client. Without it, the OpAMP server does not know that it exists. With it, boom, magic, it appears. This is a diagram that was taken from the GitHub repo for the Otel Collector. This shows us in greater detail what the OpAMP extension is doing. So, the collector is ingesting the config.yaml, and then the OpAMP extension uses that to send that over to the OpAMP server. So the collector is not only registered with the OpAMP server, but the OpAMP server also knows what that config file looks like. So Aakansha, tell us a little bit about how we enable the OpAMP extension in our Otel Collector.
So this is the Otel Collector config YAML, right? And if we take a closer look into it, so the first one is the OpAMP WS endpoint, which is the WebSocket server of the OpAMP server. In this example, the OpAMP server is listening on the port 4320, and its endpoint is /v1/OpAMP. So the port 4320 is used by the Go OpAMP server. However, if you're using any different OpAMP server, any different implementation, right, your port may vary. And similarly, a different OpAMP server may append a different suffix automatically to the endpoint. So check your server documentations. Now comes the extension. So to enable the OpAMP extensions, you need to add it to your service block in your configuration.
Right? Yeah, and to just go back for a sec, this is really important. I made this mistake. It's all good to configure this, but if you don't include that and basically say use the extension, no worky. Okay, so I alluded earlier that the OpAMP extension, yay, it turns our Otel Collector into an OpAMP client, but it's kind of useless to us because it just reports on status, read only. This is where we have another component called the OpAMP Supervisor coming into play. And this is a collector-specific component as well. And the OpAMP Supervisor, basically, it extends the functionality of the OpAMP extension. So on top of what the OpAMP extension does, it also allows us to update those configuration files and restart our collector, among other things. There's a bunch of other capabilities. And fun fact, it's one supervisor per collector. You can think of the OpAMP Supervisor as like a sidecar. You bolt it onto the collector, and so it extends the capabilities. It extends the extension. So that's basically what you can think of it as. So here is our updated diagram. And so now we have the OpAMP Supervisor, which is still talking with the OpAMP extension because we still need that OpAMP extension because it does that report status. The supervisor doesn't do that. It does the other stuff. And so by doing that, this OpAMP Supervisor plus OpAMP extension plus Otel Collector, now this is our new OpAMP client. And it's our OpAMP client that can do more stuff than just without the supervisor. And this is a detailed diagram, again, from the GitHub repo for the Otel Collector. Because the supervisor, if you look at it in GitHub, it's actually located within the Otel Collector contrib repo on GitHub. Fun fact. Now, this diagram took me a while to understand because, like I said, OpAMP is confusing. And what's going on over here, so we have the supervisor itself runs a client and a server. I'm like, when I learned about that, I'm like, what the hell? This makes no sense. But what's going on is the supervisor's OpAMP client is talking to our OpAMP backend, fancy term for the OpAMP server that is running, that all our clients our collectors are registered to. The internal OpAMP server in the supervisor talks to the OpAMP client to send it information. Meanwhile, our Otel Collector, which is like kind of our little mini OpAMP client here, is sending information to the server, so then it can send that all the way back here. So that gives you an idea in a nutshell of what is going on. So Aakansha, tell us how we configure the supervisor.
So this is the supervisor YAML, right? And again, as you can see here, there's the same endpoint, which is the WebSocket, so address of your OpAMP server, right? And then these are the capabilities of your supervisors. So it basically tells you that what it can accept and what it can report, right? And then you have the agent, which has the executable where you are mentioning the path where your collector binary and its config files will be put in. So the supervisor will read from this path, and then you have the configuration files path as well. And finally, you have a storage directory. This is where your supervisor will store its own data. So this is the part that we mentioned. So in a nutshell, this is how your configuration of supervisor YAML will look like. And while, of course, when we will demo, you will also see these same attributes, right? So
yeah, and before we go to the next slide, I do want to point out another important thing. So you see over here, this points to an executable of the Otel Collector and the collector config file. Why? Because when you start up the supervisor, it actually starts up a managed Otel Collector. So that means you are not starting up your Otel Collector and then the supervisor. You're starting up the supervisor, supervisor starts up your collector. Now, this is useful if you are running this in a bare metal situation, right? Because you need an accessible path to your collector binary. Now, if you're in a containerized environment, you might be thinking, well, how does that work? And there are a couple of solutions around that. And actually, we're going to showcase one of those solutions in the demo. But just to keep in mind here, the idea is if you're working in a containerized solution, you effectively need a container that has both the supervisor and the collector binaries in the same container so that the supervisor can access the collector binary in the container's file system. If you have the supervisor in one container and the collector in another container, that no worky, because how is the supervisor going to have access to the collector's executable? And this is where we have another component called the OpAMP bridge. Now, the OpAMP bridge is another fun part of our puzzle. It is part of the OpenTelemetry operator. Has anyone heard of the OpenTelemetry operator? Okay, super high level overview of the Otel operator. It is a Kubernetes operator for OpenTelemetry, and it does three really cool things. One, it injects instrumentation into your application code. So you don't have to go and instrument your code. It injects it, you configure some lovely YAML, and it does it for you. And there's a number of languages that are supported, including Java, .NET, Python, Go, Node.js. Now, that's number one. Number two, it manages Otel collectors in a Kubernetes native way, which is super handy because deploying Otel collectors in Kubernetes without the operator is a bit of a song and dance. And then the third thing is this OpAMP bridge, which is a newer component. And it's kind of, it can be a little bit confusing if you're just getting started with OpAMP. So hopefully this will we will help to unravel the mystery. Now, the OpAMP bridge is Kubernetes native because it is part of the Otel operator, and it is made only for Otel collectors that are managed via the Otel operator. So if you deploy your Otel collector to Kubernetes without the Otel operator, no worky. They do need, you need the Otel collector managed by the operator and the OpAMP bridge, which is provided by the operator. Now, you might be wondering, do I do the OpAMP bridge or supervisor? And as I mentioned, the OpAMP bridge, I'd say, is a better approach if you're deploying your Otel collectors to Kubernetes because it does do things in a Kubernetes native way. I think it abstracts a lot of the yuck that comes along with dealing with deploying Otel collectors in Kubernetes, and especially if you're wanting to manage your collectors at scale. It does it in a Kubernetes native way. Now, the other important thing is, unlike the supervisor, so the OpAMP bridge takes the place of the supervisor. Unlike the supervisor, it allows it manages multiple Otel collectors at once. It doesn't have to do just one, which is quite interesting. Now, what does that look like? This is a sample OpAMP bridge.yaml. And as you can see, we see a lot of the usual players, right? We have our endpoint. We still need that OpAMP server, right? Because we need to say we need to register our collectors with somewhere, right? That's our OpAMP server. We still have our capabilities. Again, these keep coming up. And then we have the components allowed. And this one's kind of interesting. So this basically says for our Otel collectors, the collector components, our receivers, our processors, our exporters, which of these am I allowing the OpAMP server to manage via the bridge? So if I exclude these, so for example, OTLP receiver, then that means if I have an OTLP receiver configured in my collector and I want to update those configurations, sorry, we will not allow the server to manage that. Now, on top of that, if you recall with the supervisor YAML, we had a component that specified a path to our Otel Collector binary. In this case, for Kubernetes deployments, we, in our Otel Collector YAML deployed in Kubernetes, right, managed by the Otel operator, we have to add a label to our Otel Collector instance that says, hey, to our Otel Collector resource that says, hey, I want the OpAMP bridge to manage me. And so we add this label called OpAMP reporting is true. And this here basically means I just want to report status. So it's kind of like the OpAMP extension. But what if I want to do more? Well, then we do OpAMP managed is true. So we're like, all right, take the wheel, OpAMP bridge, do your thing. And then you might be wondering, well, what if there are multiple OpAMP bridges defined in my Kubernetes namespace? And the answer to that is, instead of saying true, we put in the name of the OpAMP bridge Kubernetes resource. And that is the OpAMP bridge in a nutshell.
So we have covered so many things, right? But I'm sure our audience wants to know how it is being done in action, right?
Yay.
And whatever configurations we showed you would love to see it live. Right?
Yes. Yes, we are going to do a live demo. Please bear with me. It is my first live demo. I usually record my demos, so dun, dun, dun. Here we go. Okay, this is going to be fun. Let's make the screen bigger. Cool. All right, so this is my little OpAMP demo. I have a link to the GitHub repo at the end of the slide, so you can check it out for yourself. Now, what I've done is I have a Docker compose where I have I have an OpAMP server that I've containerized. And then I also have an Otel Collector that I've containerized. And what I'm going to do is demonstrate an example of the the Otel Collector running with just the OpAMP extension and registering basically with the OpAMP server. So we are starting up the OpAMP server. Oopsie. So here we go. We started our OpAMP server. And then we're also going to start our Otel Collector. Actually, before we do that, let me, one sec. So we've started up our server. (4320). Oops, 4321, sorry. The protocol, so it's listening in on 4320, but the server UI is 43. Oh, come on. Did I type that wrong? Can you see that? Oh, I did HTTPS. Bloody hell. Can't see what I'm typing. Sorry. Here we go. Yeah. Yay. Crisis averted. So we have our OpAMP server running. So let me point out a couple of things. Oh, yeah.
So now that we have not started our collector and the OpAMP server has no information of which agent, right? So there will be no communication, right?
That's right. That's right. So we don't have our collectors running. And I did want to point out, we are going to be starting a collector. So I have an Otel Collector here. And it's pointing to a collector config in my file system in src Otel config, which is this guy here. And let's blow this up. And this is our Otel config. So we have our extension. We are using WebSocket. It's a secure WebSocket endpoint, but it's not really secure. We're telling us skip verify. We're not using any certificates. Don't do that in real life. And again, we are enabling the OpAMP extension. So when we run our Otel Collector, compose up. Collector. So it has started up our Otel Collector. We've got some.
So the expectation is that the agent will just show up on the OpAMP server.
Yes. So let's check it out. And if we refresh, magic. So if we click here, what do we see? Our Otel Collector config with our extension configured. And then you can see I have these components. I have this memory limiter processor and a batch processor, which if we go over here, we look, oh, look, memory limiter processor, batch processor. Okay, it's reading the correct collector config file. Now, I do want to point out, remember I said that the extension plus the collector turns it into an OpAMP client. So if I were to go here into my services and just disable this and then rerun, then let's restart our Otel Collector. What do you think is going to happen?
It will not show up.
Oops, I'll come back. Oh, let me make this a little bit bigger. Yeah. Sorry. So we go here, it's gone.
It will not show up.
Oh my God, what happened to it?
That extension is required.
You need that extension. So this proves that we need the extension. So let's re-enable that and restart our server, our Otel Collector, sorry. And then we should see it here.
Yeah.
Magic. Okay.
So this was the scenario 1. Right?
Scenario 1. Scenario 2. What are we going to do? So we have the collector that's just running the OpAMP extension. Now we're going to do a scenario where we are running our OpAMP. So we're running the OpAMP supervisor. Now our supervisor is located in the same container. So we're doing a containerized setup. Is this the correct one? Yes. This is my supervisor container definition. And what we're doing is there's a supervisor image and there's a collector image. And all I'm doing is I'm copying the OpAMP supervisor binary and the Otel Collector contrib binary into this container. And that's it. And then we start the supervisor. It will then run the managed collector from this binary location. Now, how do we know that? It's because when we go to the supervisor, let me just make sure it's the correct one. So it is this guy here, supervisor, OpAMP supervisor 2. What we are going to do is...
And we have not mentioned the OpAMP extension in this one.
Oh, yes. Yeah, so we will talk about that in a sec. But what I want to show is the supervisor is pointing to this YAML file, the supervisor2.yaml, which I'll open here. And so you can see here, the executable is Otel contrib, which is coming from that location in our Docker container. Now, the other thing is going back to and addressing Aakansha's point. So Otel config2.yaml. This is the collector config YAML that we are going to be sending over. And this collector config YAML is pretty bare bones. It does not have an OpAMP extension defined. And you might be thinking, well, didn't you just tell me that you need the OpAMP extension?
So does that mean like the supervisor will inject something of its the extension in the collector, right?
Yes, exactly. So the supervisor does some magic. So you don't have to go and configure an Otel extension in your collector because the supervisor is managing that for you. So if we start up our supervisor 2, there we go.
And have we also we have mentioned the collector binary part
Yes.
in this one?
Yeah, we have. So I've started up supervisor 2. Fun thing to note. So when I start up the supervisor, it spits out this ID here. And this comes into play because you might have noticed that it spits out these GUIDs, right? And you're like, well, what collector is which, right? So when we refresh the screen, we started up our supervisor managed collector. This is the ID. So this is the one that we know was managed by the supervisor. When we click on here, we can see the collector config, and this is like our bare bones stuff, right? It just had debug and bash and OTLP in our pipelines, and
but we can see the extension here.
Exactly. Where's the extension? Here we go. Yeah. Here's our extension. We didn't even have that in our collector config, and yet it put one in for us. Now, the other thing that I want to mention, because I did say, remember with the supervisor, it allows us to actually update the configs. If we're just using the extension, it does not. So what happens then?
Yeah, because the extension is just read only and it just sends
Yes,
updates.
exactly.
But it does not restart the collector.
Yeah, it doesn't apply the changes, doesn't restart the collector. So for example, this is our supervisor managed collector, right? So we go over here. I want to change this exporter, debug exporter config, and we see that the verbosity is detailed. So I want to change it so that it is basic, which is the default. So basic, we go and send this to agent. And then, okay, so you might be thinking, well, that's a crock. It shows detailed. Let's refresh.
No, yeah, because the status was still false in the above.
Yeah, so here we go.
Now it's active.
Now it has updated. Now, if we go to our other one, our original collector that just had the extension, and we tried to do a similar change.
So it won't work.
That's right, because it's read-only.
Yeah.
Because it's read-only.
Yeah.
Yeah, because this one just has the OpAMP extension. And so we refresh. It looks like it's trying to do something. And we refresh it, and still nothing happened. And that's very much expected. And that was a point of confusion for me when I first did this. I'm like, well, why the hell does it not do that? Because that's all that this extension does is report on status. And then we're going to do
the third scenario.
A third scenario. So our third scenario is going to be running the OpAMP supervisor as a binary on the local file system. So in here, I have gone and, so by the way, this whole thing runs in a dev container. So the dev container sets up all this stuff. It installs the collector binary, the supervisor binary, so that you have all the components that you need to run this for yourself. And so what I'm going to do here, because I can't remember, oopsie, I can never remember these commands. I'm going to run this command here. This is OpAMP supervisor. This is basically the command for running the OpAMP supervisor. If you look in the Docker file, oopsie, if we go into the Docker file, guess what? It's the same thing, same command. So we're running this inside a Docker file. We're running this in our local file system. Before I run that, actually, I do want to point out that to prove that our supervisor is located in the file system, we do, I put it in user local bin, and then let's do a grep. So Otel Collector contrib is here, awesome. And then supervisor, our OpAMP supervisor is there too, yay. So they're running our local file system, and it is pointing to our supervisor3.yaml, which is this guy over here. So again, this endpoint points to our our OpAMP server. Now it is available to this guy on localhost. It's still the same server, and it's showing us the location of the Otel Collector contrib, which is in our local file system. And this is the location of the collector contrib the collector config YAML. Now, this config files portion, it's not mandatory, and if you leave it out, it'll put in some default value. I do not recommend leaving it out because I have no idea where it's going to try to read stuff from. Always specify these things. So with that in mind, let's finally run this example. And here we go. So it has started up. It has given us, okay, thank you for telling us. It has given us a new GUID, which we're going to copy here and go back to our friend, the OpAMP server. My goodness, there it is. And which one is it? So it's this guy. And again, this is managed by the OpAMP supervisor, so we should be able to update the configuration. So let's steal that little snippet of code from our collector. So I want to update the verbosity of our debug exporter from the default, which is basic, to detailed. So we go send this guy here. Yay. And we refresh it, and voila, it is detailed. So there we go. So that is OpAMP in a nutshell. Hopefully this demo gives you an idea of what is, of how this stuff works. Honestly, it wasn't until we played around with the demo that this OpAMP stuff finally started making sense, because I made so many assumptions at the beginning of this that were completely wrong. It was quite shocking. And really, I can't emphasize enough the importance of trying this stuff out for yourself to really get a feel for it.
Because when I tried the demo for the first time, which is there on the documentation, it was like, okay, this works and it makes sense. But then Adriana did her demo and she tried to switch things up. And then we realized, okay, this is not what we understood before. And it was weeks on weeks of learning because of this topic. And as we mentioned before as well, that the documentation is so sparsely documented, and we had to figure out that way. And we were also connected with a lot of maintainers.
Yeah. And I can't emphasize enough also, in the CNCF Slack, there is a channel dedicated to OpAMP. It's called Otel-OpAMP, and I'll include a link to that in the resources as well. And basically, I just posted questions on there, and I mean, I've posted questions on various topics as I'm trying to understand various OTel topics on different relevant channels, and it's so nice that people are willing to go and answer questions. And I'm like, great, I understand how this works, but what about this? What about that? And so they were willing to answer my questions, and I just dug deeper and deeper and deeper, in part because the examples that I saw online, I'm like, well, I reject this. I don't understand why you're presenting it this way. So I decided to try it my way. Yeah. I'm a little stubborn, but it has helped in us understanding OpAMP a lot better.
And one of the biggest discovery we found out that one supervisor was related to just only one collector, because initially I had this understanding that the supervisor is managing all the collectors, but this is where we went wrong. And then we realized that no, this is a separate component, OpAMP Bridge, which is actually doing that work for you.
Yeah. And that was another thing, another point of confusion, because when I got the supervisor working, I had a supervisor running and then a separate collector. And I remember posting the OpAMP Slack. I'm like, why is it that this pesky extra collector keeps showing up in my server, in my OpAMP server? And they're like, because that's the collector being managed by the supervisor. I'm like, oh, big aha moment. So
yeah, OpAMP literally seems simple, but it is actually a rabbit hole. We understood the hard way, right? And
it's a good rabbit hole.
And so of course OpAMP is great, but it is tricky to grasp. We won't lie. But now hopefully after this presentation, it is much simpler for you, and which should make sense, right? And of course there is a lot of moving parts. All of these components have a simple role, but collectively it plays a massive thing, right? And without each of the moving pieces, it cannot work together.
And if you don't understand how the moving parts interact, then your whole understanding of it is wrong.
Yeah. So hard agree that it is a huge learning curve. And of course, as we mentioned before, like the documentation is very sparse, and you will have to like dig around with the demos here and there, and then you will realize what actually OpAMP is and how much potential it has.
Yeah, so hopefully we took away the mystery. We Sherlock Holmes'd it for you. And with that, we'll leave you with some handy dandy resources. I do have a link to the demo repo if you want to play around with OpAMP for yourself. I have a link to the documentation for the OpAMP bridge. There is an intro to OpAMP tutorial from my coworker Adam Gardner on YouTube if like video is your thing. If anyone's going to FOSDEM this weekend and you love Otel Unplugged is happening on Monday, also in Brussels. So I think tickets are like $20 US. This is the original blog that got us going on OpAMP. This will be like one of your top hits when you Google like OpAMP tutorial. And then this is a link to the CNCF Slack group on about OpAMP. Like I said, the folks are super helpful. I will also do some shameless self-promotions. I have a podcast called Geeking Out, and I've had some really cool guests on there. I'd say my claim to fame, Kelsey Hightower, and most recently the episode that just dropped this week with Scott Hanselman, which was like a huge, like, it was so cool to interview him. We went down some fun rabbit holes. Also, if anyone is wanting to deepen their level of observability in OpenTelemetry, I do have an O'Reilly video course about it, and it does cover the Otel operator if you want to dig into that in more detail.
Yeah, and about me, so I've like recently transitioned into this solution engineering space, and me along with my friend Emily, we realized that like there is so much less representation of women in this field. So we thought of like starting a podcast where we invite women who are doing solution engineering, sales engineering, solution architecture, right? And try to understand how they went into this journey, and of course, encourage other women to be part of this kind of roles as well.
And with that, thank you so much for sticking around and learning about OpAMP, and scan the QR code to get a copy of the slides.
Yeah,
Thank you
so much.